William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. The play begins with a street battle between two families, the Montagues and the Capulets. The Prince of Verona, Aeschylus, intervenes with his men and declares that the heads of the two families will be held personally accountable for any further breach of the peace. Later, Count Paris, a young nobleman, talks to Lord Capulet about marrying his 13-year-old daughter, Juliet. Capulet objects because of the girl's young age and invites him to wait for another 2 years. However, he invites him to attract the attention of Juliet during a ball that the family is to hold that night. Juliet's mother tries to persuade her daughter to accept Paris's courtship during this ball, and Juliet says that although she will make an effort to love him, she will not express love that is not there. In this scene, Juliet's nurse is introduced as a talkative and humorous character who raises Juliet from infancy. In the meantime, Benvolio asks his cousin Romeo, Lord Montague's son, the reason for his melancholy. He discovers that it stems from an unrequited love for a girl named Rosalind, Capulet's niece. Upon the insistence of Benvolio and another friend, Mercutio, Romeo decides to attend the masquerade ball at the Capulet house in hopes of meeting Rosalind. Alongside his masked friends, Romeo attends the ball as planned, but falls in love with Juliet, forgetting about Rosalind, and she with him. Despite the danger brought on by their feuding families, Romeo sneaks into the Capulet courtyard and overhears Juliet on her balcony, vowing to love him. He makes himself known to her, and the two declare their love for each other and agree to be married. With the help of the Franciscan friar Lawrence, who hopes to reconcile the two families through their children's union, the two are married secretly the next day. All seems well until Tybalt, Juliet's hot-blooded cousin, challenges Romeo to a duel for appearing at the Capulets' ball in disguise. Though no one is aware of the marriage yet, Romeo refuses to fight Tybalt, since they are now kinsmen. Mercutio is incensed by Tybalt's insolence and accepts the duel on Romeo's behalf. In the ensuing scuffle, Mercutio is fatally wounded when Romeo tries to separate them. Romeo, angered by his friend's death, pursues and slays Tybalt, then flees. Despite his promise to call for the head of the wrongdoers, the prince merely exiles Romeo from Verona, reasoning that Tybalt first killed Mercutio, and that Romeo merely carried out a just punishment of death to Tybalt, although without legal authority. Juliet grieves at the news, and Lord Capulet, misinterpreting her grief, agrees to engage her to marry Paris in 3 days' time, threatening to disown her if she does not. The nurse, once Juliet's confidant, now tells her she should discard the exiled Romeo and comply. Juliet desperately visits Friar Lawrence for help. He offers her a drug which will put her into a death-like coma for 42 hours. She is to take it and, when discovered apparently dead, she will be laid in the family crypt. While in her sleep, the friar will send a messenger to inform Romeo so that he can rejoin her when she awakens. The messenger, however, does not reach Romeo. Romeo then learns of Juliet's death from his servant Balthazar. Grief-stricken, he buys poison from an apothecary, returns to Verona in secret and visits the Capulet crypt. He encounters Paris, who has come to mourn Juliet privately. Paris confronts Romeo, believing him to be a vandal, and in the ensuing battle, Romeo kills Paris. He then says his final words to the comatose Juliet and drinks the poison to commit suicide. Juliet then awakes. Friar Lawrence arrives and, aware of the cause of the tragedy, begs Juliet to leave, but she refuses. At the side of Romeo's dead body, she stabs herself with her lover's dagger. The feuding families and the prince meet at the tomb to find the 3 of them dead. In explanation, Friar Lawrence recounts the story of the 2 lovers. Montague reveals that his wife has died of grief after hearing of her son's exile. The families are reconciled by their children's deaths and agree to end their violent feud. The play ends with the prince's brief elegy for the lovers, for never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo. Hamlet. The central character is Prince Hamlet. He is the son of the late King Hamlet, who died 2 months earlier, and the nephew of King Claudius, his father's brother and successor. Hamlet is grieving at his father's death and suspects him murdered by Claudius. The play opens on a cold winter night at Elsinore, the royal castle. 2 sentries, Marcellus and Bernardo, are trying to persuade Hamlet's friend Horatio that they have seen King Hamlet's ghost when the ghost appears again. In the meantime, the court is assembled to celebrate Claudius's marriage to Gertrude, who is Prince Hamlet's mother and was King Hamlet's queen. Claudius uses the opportunity to announce an end to official mourning for his brother. Hamlet is angered by these events and, at midnight that evening, encounters the ghost himself. During a conversation with his son, the ghost confides that he was poisoned by Claudius and asks Hamlet to avenge him. Confirmation of the murder further infuriates Hamlet. Claudius, Gertrude and Polonius, the king's chief counsellor, are worried about Hamlet's mental state. They send 2 student friends of Hamlet's, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to seek out the reason for it. In the meantime, an agitated Hamlet has upset Polonius's daughter, Ophelia, by abruptly appearing in her chamber. Polonius misunderstands the cause and concludes an ecstasy of love is to blame. Hamlet greets Rosencrantz and Guildenstern warmly, but quickly guesses their purpose. He affects disaffection with the world. As a cure, Rosencrantz summons a troupe of actors. Hamlet seizes the opportunity to stage a play, The Murder of Gonzago, which Hamlet calls The Mousetrap, as a means of confronting his uncle with his suspicions. In this play within a play, he will reenact a king's murder and determine Claudius's guilt or innocence in King Hamlet's death by watching his response. Claudius agrees to attend the play, but first he and Polonius hide themselves to spy with Ophelia on Hamlet. Believing himself alone, Hamlet reflects on his predicament, until Ophelia alerts him to her presence. Hamlet criticizes her for immodesty and tells her to go to a nunnery, a cruel double entendre, as nunnery was Elizabethan slang for brothel, causing her great distress. Fearing for his life, the king decides to banish Hamlet to England, but first Polonius persuades him to allow Gertrude to try to discover the cause of Hamlet's illness. Hamlet directs the actors' preparations. The court assembles and the play begins. Hamlet provides a running commentary throughout. When the moment where the king is poisoned arrives, Claudius rises abruptly and leaves, proof for Hamlet of his uncle's guilt. Hamlet is summoned to his mother's bedchamber, and on his way there he sees Claudius praying. Ready to strike, Hamlet hesitates, reasoning that to kill Claudius in prayer would send him to heaven. Reaching his mother's chamber, Hamlet confronts Gertrude, who panics and cries out. Polonius, hidden behind a tapestry, reacts, and Hamlet stabs wildly the tapestry. Hamlet hopes he stabbed the king, but instead he discovers Polonius's dead body behind the tapestry. Hamlet accuses Gertrude of complicity in his father's death. She admits a small part. The ghost then appears, but is visible only to Hamlet. He tells Hamlet to treat Gertrude gently, but to avenge his death on Claudius. Unable to see the apparition, Gertrude takes Hamlet's behaviour for a sign of madness. Hamlet drags Polonius's body away and hides it. Claudius sends Hamlet to England, accompanied by Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to whom he has given a secret document requesting the prince's execution. During the journey, Hamlet discovers the document and changes it so that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are executed in his place. The following day, Hamlet is kidnapped by pirates and is returned for a ransom to King Claudius. At Elsinore, Ophelia wanders the court in grief-induced madness, singing incoherently. Laertes, Polonius' son, recently returned from abroad, is looking for revenge for his father's murder. The news of Ophelia's madness increases his desire. Claudius convinces Laertes that Hamlet is responsible for it all. Claudius proposes a fencing match using poisoned swords in order to achieve Laertes' revenge. Gertrude interrupts to report that Ophelia has drowned. 2 clown gravediggers discuss Ophelia's apparent suicide, which denies her full funeral rites while digging her grave. Hamlet arrives with Horatio and chats with a gravedigger who unearths the skull of a jester from Hamlet's childhood, Yorick. A funeral procession approaches. On hearing that it is Ophelia's cortege and seeing Laertes leap into her grave, Hamlet advances and he and Laertes fight. They are separated and Hamlet is invited to duel with Laertes. He accepts. The court enters, ready for the match. Claudius orders cups of wine prepared, one of which he has poisoned. During the match, by accident, Gertrude drinks from the poisoned cup. Meanwhile, Laertes succeeds in piercing Hamlet with his poisoned sword, but in the struggle is wounded by it himself. With Laertes and Hamlet mortally wounded, Gertrude dies. In his dying moments, Laertes reveals the king's dual plot to Hamlet, and they are reconciled. Hamlet manages to kill Claudius and, just before dying himself, names Fortinbras as his heir to the throne. As Fortinbras arrives, Horatio recounts the tale, and Fortinbras orders Hamlet's body borne off in honour. The Merchant of Venice. Bassanio, a young Venetian nobleman, wishes to marry the beautiful and wealthy heiress Portia of Belmont. Having squandered his estate, Bassanio approaches his friend Antonio, a wealthy merchant of Venice, who has previously and repeatedly bailed him out for 3,000 ducats needed to subsidize his expenditures as a suitor. Antonio agrees, but since he is cash poor, his ships and merchandise are busy at sea, he promises to cover a bond if Bassanio can find a lender. So Bassanio turns to the Jewish moneylender Shylock and names Antonio as the loan's guarantor. Antonio has already made an enemy of Shylock through his outspoken anti-Semitism. The moneylender knows of Antonio's customary refusal to borrow or lend money with interest. Shylock is at first reluctant to grant the loan, citing abuse he has suffered at Antonio's hand, but finally agrees to lend the sum to Antonio without interest upon one condition. If Antonio is unable to repay it at the specified date, Shylock may take a pound of Antonio's flesh. Bassanio does not want Antonio to accept such a risky condition. Antonio is surprised by what he sees as the moneylender's generosity. No usance, interest, is asked for, and he signs the contract. With money at hand, Bassanio leaves for Belmont with his friend Graziano, who has asked to accompany him. Graziano is a likeable young man, but is often flippant, overly talkative and tactless. Bassanio warns his companion to exercise self-control, and the two leave for Belmont and Portia. Meanwhile, in Belmont, Portia is awash with suitors. Her father left a will stipulating each of her suitors must choose correctly from one of 3 caskets, one each of gold, silver and lead. If he picks the right casket, he gets Portia. The first suitor, the luxurious Prince of Morocco, chooses the gold casket, interpreting its slogan, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire," Act 2, Scene 7, as referring to Portia. The second suitor, the conceited Prince of Aragon, chooses the silver casket, which proclaims, "Who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves," Act 2, Scene 7, imagining himself to be full of merit. Both suitors leave empty-handed, having rejected the lead casket because of the baseness of its material and the uninviting nature of its slogan. "Who chooseth me must give and hazard all he hath," Act 2, Scene 7. The last suitor is Bassanio, whom Portia wishes to succeed, having met him before. As Bassanio ponders his choice, members of Portia's household sing a song which says that fancy, not true love, is engendered in the eyes, with gazing fed, prompting Bassanio to disregard outward shows and ornament, and chooses the lead casket, winning Portia's hand. At Venice, Antonio's ships are reported lost at sea. This leaves him unable to satisfy the bond. Shylock is even more determined to exact revenge from Christians after his daughter Jessica has fled home and eloped with the Christian Lorenzo, taking a substantial amount of Shylock's wealth with her, as well as a turquoise ring, which was a gift to Shylock from his late wife, Leah. Shylock has Antonio brought before the court. At Belmont, Bassanio receives a letter telling him that Antonio has been unable to return the loan taken from Shylock. Portia and Bassanio marry, as do Graziano and Portia's handmaid, Nerissa. Bassanio and Graziano then leave for Venice, with money from Portia to save Antonio's life by offering the money to Shylock. Unknown to Bassanio and Graziano, Portia has sent her servant, Balthazar, to seek the counsel of Portia's cousin, Bellario, a lawyer at Padua. The climax of the play comes in the court of the Duke of Venice. Shylock refuses Bassanio's offer of 6,000 ducats, twice the amount of the loan. He demands his pound of flesh from Antonio. The Duke, wishing to save Antonio but unable to nullify a contract, refers the case to a visitor who introduces himself as Balthazar, a young male, doctor of the law, bearing a letter of recommendation to the Duke from the learned lawyer Bellario. The doctor is actually Portia in disguise, and the law clerk who accompanies her is actually Nerissa, also in disguise. As Balthazar, Portia repeatedly asks Shylock to show mercy in a famous speech, advising him that mercy is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. However, Shylock adamantly refuses any compensations and insists on the pound of flesh. As the court grants Shylock his bond and Antonio prepares for Shylock's knife, Portia deftly appropriates Shylock's argument for specific performance and points out that the contract only allows Shylock to remove the flesh, not the blood, of Antonio. Thus, if Shylock were to shed any drop of Antonio's blood, his lands and goods would be forfeited under Venetian laws. Further damning Shylock's case, she tells him that he must cut precisely 1 pound of flesh, no more, no less. She advises him that if the scale do turn, but in the estimation of a hair, thou diest, and all thy goods are confiscate. Defeated, Shylock concedes to accepting Bassanio's offer of money for the defaulted bond. First his offer to pay the bond thrice, which Portia rebuffs, telling him to take his bond, and then merely the principal, which Portia also prevents him from doing on the ground that he has already refused it in the open court. She then cites a law under which Shylock, as a Jew and therefore an alien, having attempted to take the life of a citizen, has forfeited his property, half to the government and half to Antonio, leaving his life at the mercy of the Duke. The Duke immediately pardons Shylock's life. Antonio asks for his share in use until Shylock's death, when the principal will be given to Lorenzo and Jessica. At Antonio's request, the Duke grants remission of the state's half of forfeiture, but on the condition of Shylock converting to Christianity and bequeathing his entire estate to Lorenzo and Jessica. Bassanio does not recognize his disguised wife, but offers to give a present to the supposed lawyer. First she declines, but after he insists, Portia requests his ring and Antonio's gloves. Antonio parts with his gloves without a second thought, but Bassanio gives the ring only after much persuasion from Antonio, as earlier in the play he promised his wife never to lose, sell, or give it. Nerissa, as the lawyer's clerk, also succeeds in likewise retrieving her ring from Graziano, who does not see through her disguise. At Belmont, Portia and Nerissa taunt and pretend to accuse their husbands before revealing they were really the lawyer and his clerk in disguise. After all, the other characters make amends. Antonio learns from Portia that 3 of his ships were not stranded and have returned safely after all.